Joining me now, Democratic strategist and advisor to House Oversight Committee Republicans, Kurt Bardella. Kurt, thank you so much for your time there. We just heard from Kelly. This is certainly a lot of money. We're talking billions of dollars. Did his speech do enough to garner American support?
I think it did, in that how he powerfully and I think very effectively was able to intertwine funding for continuing the war in Ukraine as well as support for Israel, and that our national interests are best represented by continuing to support both of those fronts. And if we allow Hamas, if we allow Putin to just run unchecked, if we retreat from that battlefield financially, that it's just going to create a bigger problem for us as well as any democracy-loving country. We cannot send the message to these dictatorial authoritarian figures that when the going gets tough, we abandon our allies. That's just going to create open season on democracies worldwide.
And I want to talk to you more about that, but I kind of want to zero in on one specific thing. You know, this is $60 billion to Ukraine, and that's Ukraine alone. There is certainly criticism, you know, coming from Republicans and Democrats on tying aid to Israel to aid to Ukraine. Do you think that's the right approach by the president?
I think that it is, in part because right now, when you look at the current condition of Congress and the House of Representatives, the idea that we can piecemeal these things and move multiple pieces of legislation. I mean, my God, we don't even have a Speaker of the House. We don't have a functioning Congress right now. So I think that whenever the time comes, hopefully in the very near future, that we're able to move legislation again, I think we need to do this in one big shot as much as possible, because clearly Congress is dysfunctional. And we have to remember, too, that when it comes to the Senate, Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, he's very supportive of continuing the funding in Ukraine, that there are a lot of Republicans who want to do this. It's not an accident that Mitch McConnell, who traditionally keeps a lower profile, is scheduled to do multiple Sunday shows this coming weekend.
So, Kurt, you know, to dig into this a little bit more, $14 billion for Israel, on top, of course, of the military support in the form of the warships, which we know are being used to try to deter further aggression. Is that level of support necessary?
I think it is. I think that this is a situation where you certainly don't want to run into an underfunding issue. Again, because it's so challenging to fund things with the congressional dynamics always changing, with things getting harder to move forward. I think you take your biggest shot first, because there's no telling, especially as we get closer to 2024 election and that calendar starts going on, it's going to get so much harder to pass anything, to get funding for everything. Everything will become so politicized. Go big right now while you can, because we may not be able to later if we need to.
Well, and speaking of things becoming politicized, I know we've certainly seen the pushback on this level of support. And I'm talking about pushback coming from within factions of the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. Is the war in Israel going to potentially create some real deep divisions among Dems? Because we're seeing what can happen when it happens on the other side. We're seeing right now with, House Republicans.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think that while certainly there are those on the left side of the Democratic Party who are going to express their consternation and who might end up opposing certain measures, I don't think that they have the ability to just completely tank legislation either and grind the entire process to a halt and almost self-sabotage the institution the way that we have seen from the Republicans right now with everything unfolding. The Democratic Party has always been a big tent party. We saw during the time when Nancy Pelosi was presiding and had the same narrow majority. There were those on the left who weren't always happy with how things were going. They were allowed to express that, but at the end of the day, we still got stuff done. And I think that's such a contrast to what we're seeing right now from the Republicans in the House, who, no one right now knows what's going on. They're in this closed door meeting right now. And, you and I, who knows how that's going, right?
Yeah, that is true. But my last question for you, Kurt. Speaking of getting things done, the president is also addressing, or it appears to be addressing the crisis at our border, including aid in the package. Do you think that's a smart move? Is that a way to at least maybe potentially get some Republicans on board?
Yeah, I think that gives them cover, right? We just heard in his nominating speech for Jim Jordan, Kevin McCarthy on the House floor, make a point to say every Democrat has opposed border funding. This neutralizes that, right? This says, okay, let's call your bluff. Let's see if you Republicans are willing to vote against a measure that includes border funding, because that's what they say they want. On every show, they talk about immigration, border security, national security. Well, here's billions of dollars for that. Let's put your money where your mouth is and see where you vote.
We will certainly see what happens. Kurt Bardella, great speaking with you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.